It's really important to not be in the mindset of I'm an email marketer as opposed to an email publisher. For somebody who's trying to build a relationship or maintain a relationship, you have to deliver value that isn't promotional. So that's how you make yourself feel welcome in the inbox. And you don't get too many shots at that before somebody decides you're no longer valuable.
Most senior living marketing is built to win attention this week, even though the decision gets made over years. This week's guest believes the communities that win the next decade will not be the ones shouting louder. They'll be the ones who show up consistently in the inbox with something families actually want to read.
Welcome to From Leads to Leases, a CCR growth podcast that helps senior living providers transform their complex challenges into opportunities. Listen in for stories from industry leaders, innovative strategies, and insights. And with our expertise, learn how to increase occupancy faster, guaranteed.
Welcome back to another episode of From Leads to Leases, the podcast that dives deep into the senior living and senior care industries, bringing you insights, strategies, and stories from the experts at the forefront of innovation, leadership, and care. I'm your host, Jerry Vinci, founder of CCR Growth, the only demand generation agency that is exclusive to the senior living industry. And through this podcast, I'm here to guide you through the evolving landscape of senior care, exploring the innovations, strategies, and leadership insights that are shaping the future of the industry. Whether you're a provider, a caregiver, or industry leader, this show's here to help you make informed decisions and create meaningful impact. All right, today I'm joined by Maureen Norman, the founder of Stake Media Group. Maureen spent decades inside the advertising and media world, then made a sharp pivot. She decided to build for the audience most marketers still underestimate, adults of retirement age. She also has direct hands-on publishing experience. She writes to a large subscriber base at high frequency, runs polls and surveys to understand what actually resonates, and is now expanding into white label, private label, and newsletter as a service models for brands that need a trustworthy way to nurture relationships through the inbox. So if you've ever wondered why most community newsletters fail, why your inquiry list goes cold, or how to stay relevant during a long sales cycle without sounding salesy, this conversation will give you a different playbook. So, Maureen, welcome to the show. I'm so glad to have you here.
Thank you so much, Jerry. It's a pleasure to be here speaking about one of my favorite topics, the inbox, everybody's beloved inbox.
I'm still a fan of the inbox. I think I still have some great content coming in there. I think it's definitely an audience that gets overlooked, But I think also the audience that we serve, senior living, it also gets overlooked to some degree. I think there's a lot of brands that treat adults of retirement age like a sideline audience, but the reality is they're driving like a huge amount of the economic activity in this country. I was looking at like AARP, and they were saying something like the 50 plus cohort contributes 8.3 trillion to the U.S. economy annually. It's like 40% of our total GDP. So clearly they're making some financial purchasing decisions. I guess my first question for you would just be, what did your career in big advertising teach you about how brands talk past adults of retirement age?
Sure, happy to talk about that after a few decades working both representing brands in an ad agency setting. I actually started as a copywriter and then moving into media, working for publishers. And by that, I mean TV, radio, print, digital. One thing was abundantly clear and has yet to change, which is if you're, the buying target is 25 to 54. And if you're over 54, it's just treated as a homogenous, amorphous group. It's puzzling to me how that hasn't changed. I think there's so many indicators as to why it should. So it's a question that really needs more exploration. And in fact, I've spent a great deal of time thinking about it because I've been at this now coming up 10 years. In 2017, I started the business. 2021, I started publishing. And we were never, it was never my intention to be about anti-aging, ageism. That wasn't where I wanted to be because my experience told me there was a better way to help the community succeed. So it was like, okay, I'll flip the script. Instead of working for the bad guys, I'll work for the good guys. Not to say clients are bad guys, but I thought, okay, I'll take what I've learned and work for my people, right? And that forced me to look at who they were and understanding that we have these great big 19, 20-year cohorts that demographers have determined and popular culture has embraced and people rally around was really problematic because you're looking at a span of time where, people's shared experience over 20 years, depending on when they were born, it doesn't look anything. The guy born in year one doesn't look anything like the guy or gal born in year 19 or 20.
Yeah,
So
very true.
I really settled on people born in the 60s. And the reason I chose that decade was this was going to be the next wave of retirement. And I thought there was a fair opportunity there. 48 million North American wide, a good addressable market, and a really great opportunity to understand and impact how to shepherd and help steward these people through the next phase and actually determine what it's going to look like because we all know it's going to be different. And so along comes Pew Research, which said in, I think, 2022 or 23, we're going to do the same. They started looking at their research. They were going to carve it up into people born in decades. So that was validating for me. And it really helped me understand if media and brands are going to do something different, let's help them understand why they should. And that began with, okay, let's pick the 60s. You're born in the 60s, you grew up in the 70s, you came of age in the 80s. Let's look at what's happened to you in those intervening decades that brought you to this point. Well, you carried a lot of the digital revolution. I call this the last of the analog, first of the digital. Every single thing in life that this group of people did looks different from when they started out, from how you bank to how you date to how you
Hmm.
apply for a mortgage. That's what my experience taught me, that we can't just be about the number and we can't just look at the group over 55 as one. It's at least three. It's 50, 60, 70s, and arguably now with longer lifespan, 80s, perhaps even 90s. I know some pretty viable 90-year-olds who are traveling and spending dough and helping the grandkids and they're active participants in the economy. So um that's what that experience taught me. We have to do things differently.
That's great insight. And that makes me think of, some, I look at that demographic all the time and that age range as well. And I'm just like, man, there is such a big difference. I mean, I'm like, I'm a Gen Xer, but I'm like 1 or 2 years away from being a millennial. So like for me, identifying as a Gen Xer seems strange when there's Gen Xers that are, uh, what, 65 now, we're just in a very different space. Now, because you work with such a large array of individuals, do you feel like focusing on a demographic group like that becomes difficult because, it's almost like I think a lot of people they talk about the boomers, they say they like X, Y, and Z. They talk about Gen Xers, they say they like X, Y, and Z. But because the age range is so wide, I mean, do you feel like it's not actually accurate? Like there's obviously like smaller cohorts within that demographic that needs to be addressed separately?
Yeah, for sure there are. And, as far down the funnel as you want to go in terms of personalization or customization, you can find those pockets and you can mine those pockets. And we segment all the time when we publish. And we segment based on, in our community, people's comments and feedback and questions and frankly, their engagement. And so you have to set up cues to understand where you're going to tap into those differences because you're right. There are some things that are universal. And so universal might be, last week we polled who's cooler, Scooby Doo or Snoopy, excuse me. And care to guess who's cooler?
Not Snoopy.
Snoopy by a long shot.
Whoa, really?
Yeah.
No way.
75% thought he was cooler than Scooby Doo. Now, talking to you, a Gen X, it might be a different answer, right? So those
Yeah.
little insights really help us. I think your best friend is surveying and polling, and I'll probably say that repeatedly, but it's really underutilized and undervalued because the slightest tweak, and it makes a world of difference for how people get excited and engage and how they feel connected. So similarly, when we sign people up, we have a real short survey and we ask, what's the best year for pop culture? And that cues us as to, okay, they might be born in the 60s, but if they're born in 69, they're going to have a different answer and they're going to be tiptoeing into Gen X territory. That means a little more MTV, a little less AM radio in terms of
Hmm.
reference and nostalgia. For sure, you're right. We do two things simultaneously. The things everybody has in common. Let's talk about my born in the 60s cohort versus the subtle differences within that. And you just have to work it. You have to work it, but you also have to understand what's the need. Why am I even exploring that? Well, if it's for a client, you look at the broader research. So many people lose extended benefits when they retire or when they lose their job. And so that's a universal need. And as you approach those years, you may need more support with things like medication and testing and so on. So that would be a universal, and you wouldn't need to really decipher what are the specifics within that. But again, it all works together. So what's the need? Why do we want this information? Is it coming from a sponsor, an advertiser? Is it coming from the content team who wants to create something and have great engagement? So we balance the two at the same time.
Talk to me about stake, because I know you have a vision and see it as a longevity economy business. To explain to our audience what that is for you, and how what is that vision that you're seeing?
Thank you. That's a great question. Curiously, the word has been really, say the word co-opted. It's really been taken over by the supplement community, the biohacking community, the wellness community. But in my nascence, it was really about what you quoted about ARP's statistic about the longevity economy 10 years ago was really just describing what's happening with consumers over 55. And your 8.3 trillion statistic is amazing because it actually is the third largest economy in the world after China and the US, if you just take it on its own. So, not insignificant at all. I saw it as an opportunity to help shepherd the next wave of retirees in primarily in two fronts. How are we going to make use of and afford this gift of longer lifespan and healthy lifespan, hopefully? And where are we going to live? Those to me were the two most important topics. And I focused a lot on the where to live. And really, my husband thinks I'm crazy, but at one time I thought I was going to be a developer and build communities. So what I've actually figured out is a way to make use of the online community we've built and figure out how to apply what we've built and learned with them to the benefit of people really building communities. And that really came to light for me about a year ago when I had a chance encounter and met a gentleman named Ian Jones, who's developing 55 plus communities in the US and Canada. I think he's got maybe a dozen in the works right now. And his business is called Joy Living, which is a lovely acronym for just older youth. And he's
Love that.
got a really interesting model where he's working with religious organizations and not-for-profits and charities, and with the religious communities in particular their buildings. He's redeveloping their real estate, reinventing it, and building affordable rentals. So this is a huge gap, right? The missing middle, where it's people who don't need full-time care, but they can't afford active adult. These independent living communities can be years waiting lists for years as well. So they're working really hard to get to market with affordable, and part of their real beautiful thing about their model is then they turn the building back. It's a turnkey thing back to the owner for their
Wow.
growth of the charity. Yeah. So it's a really interesting endeavor. There's certainly lots of inventory because we see a decline in people attending religious institutions, and there's a lot of real estate in those communities. So that's what they're doing. And I saw the opportunity because they saw what we were doing and knew that we were speaking to a 55 plus audience, and we connected. And it's just an interesting way now. I had once said to my husband, I'm going to build 1,000 homes if I can house 1,000 people. So working with Joy, it'll be many more than that. So that's what got us here, and where I see the connection to my vision for the longevity economy. You don't have to actually be driving it, but you can be participating in it, as I saw, which is shepherding these people to enjoying this much greatly appreciated gift of longer life.
Oh, that's an amazing story. Don't give up on your dream of owning your own communities too, because that's something that I aspire to do as well. My wife and I have been talking for years about investing, and then eventually, owning our own buildings. I
I
yeah,
love that. I love
it's
that.
hard to be in this industry and not want to do that, right?
Yeah.
You kind of fall in love with it on some level.
You know what, Jerry? For me, my experience was super personal because I saw my parents retire, and they were snowbirds. They spent about half the year in Florida in a small community,
Mhm.
60 residents or 60 homes, maybe 100 residents. And man, they had each other's back, and it was a marvel to behold. Was it a little ridiculous at times? Was it Boca del Vista? Oh yeah, but they loved it. But at the same time, I would have people pull me aside and say, if I don't see your mom, like, I go knocking, don't you worry, she's good here. And, oh, your dad's playing shuffleboard. What? My dad plays shuffleboard? So I loved the energy of a small, tight-knit community, which comes with its, everybody knows everybody's business. But at a certain point, that's a really good thing because it protects the community. So yeah, I haven't given up. I mostly haven't given up, but we'll see.
I wanted to go back and talk a little bit more about the demographic aspect of senior living messaging, because I think this is where a lot of communities get it wrong. That when we talk about 55 plus, I mean, in reality, that's like a 30-year spread of life stages. Which obviously there's differences in people's readiness, their health realities, and even how they identify themselves. And I think just the messaging loses precision when communities market to that larger demographic. So when someone says to you, our audience is 55 plus, what do you do first to force clarity?
The first thing I do is say, yeah, and, it's like improv, yes, and,
Yeah. Yeah.
because that's merely the beginning. I mean, honestly, I don't ask yes, and I ask why. Why have you decided that's your audience? And that then opens up the conversation to, well, we're building affordable housing. Okay, great. Let's talk about who your target resident is and who do they know and who else knows them and how you're going to get them to move in. But if it's just, if it's another type of brand, the beginning of the conversation is, how have you decided that that product is right for that group? And let's talk a little bit more about where they are. And if you think about the 55-year-old today versus 10 years ago or 20 years ago, we have to talk about, in broader terms, we have to talk about what was their life experience over the last 20 years. There's a very, very strong demarcation between the millennials' parents and the Gen Z parents. And that distinction is, there's a direct line you can draw to how much later women started starting families, or families
Yeah.
started building families. And so
Right.
that's huge, because fast forward that 20 years and you're going to see 55-year-olds with kids, many of them likely still at home, maybe not even through college, versus 65-year-olds, kids done college, maybe struggling in the workplace, but also happy to be hanging out with mom and dad. Then you get to a 75-year-old and it's completely different again. So I think the beginning of the conversation is, why do you think that's your audience? And what do you know about them? Because I might surprise you with what I know about them. And here's how you start to unpack those three groups going forward, by looking back. Really, you have to start by looking back to see how they got to where they are.
Do you think that lack of clarity in the messaging is part of the issue in this industry too? Because I mean, less than 10% of the addressable market in senior living will, as of right now, will ever even move into a community. So we're roughly missing 90% of the market, and obviously there's like, I've seen data points of, like 75% of adults that are 50 plus have no desire to move out of their home, right? Like their goal is to stay in their home forever if they can. So, right there, you only have 25% of people who are even open to the idea of moving at some point. Do you think it's the messaging, that broad kind of like 55 plus label, that makes it harder for people to see this as a reality for them?
I think there is so much opportunity to figure that exact thing out. And so start with understanding that most people aren't moving into a place you're going to build. But saying I want to age in place, that we have to ask what place, because really that's two sides of the same coin, because likely that's somebody saying, I don't want to be in setting A, B, or C that I saw my loved one in. That's not for me. But to say I want to age in place, we need to understand more about what people mean by that, what they expect out of that experience, and are we building that thing? And if that thing is right here in my own home, then that's a completely different conversation. But is there a role for senior care to play? For sure, because I think that relies on innovation and uh, really, really disrupting the model to understand senior care isn't a place, it's a service.
Hmm.
So we need to provide the service. The question is, where's that going to be and what are those services? I follow Joe Coughlin at MIT, and he delivered some really great insights maybe about a month ago around the use of meal delivery service and grocery delivery service. And while it's not a huge segment, it's a meaningful one and it's growing. And so, what are the DoorDashes of the world doing? Because they surely have a role to play, those kinds of companies, with reinventing aging in place and servicing aging in place. What is it? Is it medication delivery? Is it any and all of the above? There's countless opportunities there. So I think that that's the challenge. First off, what are you building and for whom? It's a bit of a challenge because clearly there's a lot of capital tied up in the old model or the existing model, shall we say.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
so how do you encourage by way of providing, here's the community and here's what they want, and they're telling us age in place? I suggest it behooves marketers and community builders like me to really understand and help marketers builders, what does that mean when somebody says I want to age in place? And let's think about ways we haven't even thought about yet. Jerry's Village. It's like 10 people. I've seen so many great versions of people buying, a mountaintop and setting up 6 yurts. I mean, not quite yurts, but, just to have that experience of I want somebody nearby, but not right in my place.
Hmm.
So there's all kinds of opportunity. Of course, when it's so big like that, it's hard to figure out where's the play here, especially for capital looking to invest. What's the move that's most advantageous and will deliver the most value? But I think there's just limitless possibilities, and what will happen is there'll be 5 options. I'm picking a number out of the air, but I could see 5 strong options for what does aging in place mean and for whom.
For senior living marketers too, I think, if we're talking about the inbox, if they're looking to segment their emails, would there be a way to segment based on like somebody's readiness to move rather than on the demographic label? I find that even in our space too, when we're like helping communities build wait lists and things like that, everybody's like, well, how do you build a successful wait list? It's like it's based on readiness. If somebody is ready to go, they get moved to the top of the list because it's a whole process. The whole point of marketing and sales arm of senior living is to help transition people in an effective, efficient way. So understanding who is ready, because that's the person that that whole entire team can put energy behind and help make that transition now, rather than some other disjointed approach where like somebody is starting the process but they still need to sell their home and they still need to do X, Y, and Z before they move in. It's not really giving someone who has the opportunity to move in that opportunity. So from a marketing or email perspective, what would what would marketing to readiness versus like just a demographic label look like?
That's a really great question. And I think a lot of that relies on understanding the support systems that we believe to be in place or surrounding people who may be the next occupant. And so we always widen our circle in the work we're doing with joy, looking at and thinking about who are the next layer and how do we work with them? Because anybody who is looking to move has likely adopted the mindset that they're going to move. But I think
Hmm.
there's a much bigger challenge around people who haven't made the leap and their mindset isn't there. And so then you rely on sons, daughters, friends, care providers, medical practitioners. I think there's a lot that can be done certainly with the inbox to help provide content and information to those people to help equip and arm them so that they're getting the information they need to support people in their readiness journey. I think there's a lot that can be done in particular with caregivers, which is a massive, massive, massive opportunity. And the numbers are just pretty wild. The number of people that are working as unpaid caregivers, really, I'm talking about, but paid caregivers too. I think that's underlooked, right? Or overlooked rather. And I think there's something to be said for mining that. How do we support support the people behind the people? I think there's a huge opportunity there because nobody just wakes up one morning and, well, I shouldn't say nobody, but I would expect the most people who are approaching that decision are reluctant and reticent. And it's the support of loved ones and professionals in their lives that can make that difference. And I think that's a great, great way to target them.
One in six adults in the U.S. is a family caregiver, and 80% of them go unpaid. It's kind of crazy.
Staggering.
And yeah, there's another data point that said I think only 22% of them ever receive any type of like formal training. So they're
Yeah.
juggling a ton between their own family, their job, and then on top of that, taking care of a family member. That's very, very difficult.
I think I think it's I think it's worth really looking at that, taking a hard look at that because the two shouldn't work in isolation. They really need to be working together and there's a lot of work to be done to support both, but there's an opportunity there to help them work together.
Yeah. I want to talk about why the inbox still wins, mostly because it's habit based and not hype based. And when I say that, if we look at social media, Gary Vaynerchuk yesterday had a post on social media. He was talking about the fact that it's not social media anymore; it's interest media. Like back in the day, you used to be on social media, you would see all the posts from the people you follow and your friends, and now it's you see posts of whatever you're interested in, regardless if that page has one follower. If it creates a really good piece of content, you might see it on your social feed if it's relevant to the things that you like and typically watch. Email is kind of the opposite. Email runs on habit rather than on hype. So, in your opinion, what makes an email feel like it belongs in someone's life and not just in their inbox? Because I know that people really, they really keep us only a small number of senders that they truly value in their inbox, and everything else just kind of gets kicked out.
It's another great question, and I think one of the things that's worth noting is 96% of people over 65 use email and are, I
Hmm.
mean, they're committed, right? And it goes back to me pointing out, this is part of a life transition to the digital age. And it was our first tech toy, if you will. So it's got history. So you can't buy history, right? And so you have to respect that it's got history. And that's a big part of why people are open to being engaged in the inbox. It's the number one thing this age group does on their smartphone. That's a Statista data point. And 70% of people in this group, and I talk about my audience in particular, so people between the ages of, 60 and 70, 70% of them close it down if it's not rendering properly on mobile. So really important to understand there's email, but then there's also how am I accessing that email? Because
Yeah,
once upon a time
true.
it was strictly desktop. For a period of time it was tablet, but now it's increasingly smartphone. Excuse me, smartphone. In our own audience, 87% of opens are on mobile, believe it or not. So you have to understand the form factor, first of all, and then understand, okay, that phone is a very personal thing. So now we're talking about a personal communication inside a personal device. So from the outset, understand that that's where you are. It's really important to not be in the mindset of I'm an email marketer as opposed to an email publisher. They're very different, and marketing is proven and effective for promotional content. For
Hmm.
somebody who's trying to build a relationship or maintain a relationship, you have to deliver value that isn't promotional. So that's how you make yourself feel welcome in the inbox. And you don't get too many shots at that before somebody decides you're no longer valuable. And it's much easier now to be eliminated with one click, both inside your email, just inside your inbox. By law, you have to provide a measure to unsubscribe, but it's way easier for people to get there long before they've read what you've put out there. So I think it's really important to understand how people are engaging with you in a very personal manner and what you do with that personal invitation to be in a personal space with a prospect, a community member, a reader, a subscriber.
Pew Research had a couple of interesting data points I wanted to ask you about and see what your thoughts were. All these 2 points here. Pew reports that 30% of US adults get news from email newsletters at least sometimes, uh, which didn't sound, I figured it would be a higher number than that. So maybe that's just, across the board, I guess. And then, but they also said uh, that so 71% of newsletter readers subscribe to fewer than 5 newsletters, which I also found low because I feel like a lot of people might be subscribed to things they don't even realize is a newsletter, right? 'Cause just
Right.
like people click on ads on Google, they don't know they're clicking on ads. They just think they're clicking on the search results. So I feel like this might be a very skewed data point.
Yeah. It was. It was a great study. I've touted it a bunch, and I've asked people to reference it when they want to have a conversation about this topic. But I
Hmm.
think one of the things that's really important to recognize is that Pew was really looking at it inside the framing of news. So, how did people respond? Because if somebody follows The Ringer and they're a sports fan, they may have underreported to them that that was sports news that they followed and they got a newsletter.
Yeah.
So, I think there's a little bit of distilling there of the data to really understand. But broadly speaking, I don't disagree with the findings that people get about 30% of their news from a newsletter. I thought that was a pretty impressive number, actually. And it speaks to the size of opportunity that's still out there, frankly, if we want to grow the channel as a news channel. And you see that with all of the journalists launching their own Substacks and all of the activity around beyond just creators, internet streaming YouTube creators. Now we see published journalists and writers following the same path. So
Mhm.
I think it's super interesting. I liked the number 5, and I think what happens is you see a lot of promotional stuff, like you said, that it's under the guise of a newsletter, but it's really a
Yeah.
marketing
It's really not. Yeah.
communication, right?
Yeah.
So if Pew really looked at what's news and they had, you know, qualifiers around what that is, I believe that data, and I feel that data actually aligns. I think about my own inbox and what I read that isn't for business and research purposes. And there's probably 4 or 5 that I read every day, not all of them, not top to bottom. Sometimes I'll cherry pick and skim, but others I read every word of. So, and I also liked the idea that it was, the findings showed that it was not strictly one group of people. All age groups were interested. And I think on the younger end, that speaks to a backlash against traditional media, perhaps, and certainly traditional news organizations. And I think people are looking for other mechanisms, and it serves a good purpose because you can read it at your leisure. You can come and go. In fact, our newsletter gets opened 1.7 times each issue. So people come and go. We know some people come and go 5, 6, 7 times a day when they look at our newsletter. So there's a frequency play there for sure too that's really, really valuable.
Yeah. I love that. Kind of and bridging that back to a senior living community, if a marketer is sending out a newsletter on a regular basis, I mean, what does that need to do for the reader and not the brand in order for it to resonate with the audience?
I think if you're in the business of building a community that's going to take a while to take shape, then you really must be engaged in a relationship to help people prepare to be part of the community and building the community. So I think the role of the inbox at that stage is letting people know that it is theirs to shape. So it's not about the building, it's about the people in the community. That's how you make it feel like it's about them. And so what does that look like? Let's talk about where you are now. What do you like about the place you are now?
Hmm.
Why are you moving at this point? What do you hope to have happen? How do you see the community evolving? Let's talk about the best florist, where do you think we can buy, great produce and the kinds of things that anchor people in communities. So if we think about the things that people like to do within 15 minutes of their home, these are the places where we can start to build relationships with both the businesses that are there, the organizations, the service organizations. So I really think it's about community building. That's how you make it about them because they're going to be part of, and if it's brand new, all the more, they'll be establishing what the community is. But I think it's really about less about the crane went up 2 stories today and more about, hey, there's a new Starbucks or a new Dunkin' or a new fitness class. Or would you like a fitness class? Those kinds of things really help sustain excitement and anticipation and make people feel like they're playing a role.
I mean, because there's so many different audiences too within a community space, does that lend itself to having multiple newsletters? Because you've got the residents themselves, you got family members of the residents, you've got prospective residents and prospective residents' families, plus you've got the staff. I mean, there's all different ways that you could position that, and all of them might be interested in different aspects of what's going on in the community. So if you're, if on average people have 5 or less newsletters that they subscribe to, what's going to keep my community newsletter in someone's inbox?
Right. So let's understand the things that everybody has in common. Everybody's going to end up in this place, whether you're a resident an employee, supervisor, a vendor. So let's start with that and then figure out what role do you play within that community? And then we can figure out the content that's for everybody and then build content that's just for you. You're right. It's important because these are all the various stakeholders that are going to shape the community. You can't you absolutely can't expect one newsletter to do all of that, but you could do it in probably two versions of the same newsletter because, as I mentioned, people generally, and Pew did allude to this in the research, people don't read everything. They find the thing that's for them. So best practices really are to have 5, 6, 7 pieces of content where you want somebody to be really excited about 2 or 3 of them. So you can build it out that way. So perhaps it's families and residents, and then the business side, whether it's a vendor or an operator or an.
Yeah, you've got to get super granular with it. I think, even within our email campaigns that we build out for our senior living clients, whether it's an automated series or something else, it's very much user driven. So depending on what stage someone's in, if they expressed interest, they're getting one thing. If they booked a tour, they're getting another thing. If they booked a tour and didn't show up, they get down, sent down another path. So all of those activities are going to determine the type of content they get because you always want to be adding value at every point throughout the process. There's always something, and especially with the community, I just feel like there's so many things happening all at once, so many great things to share that you always have something to talk about with every one of these audiences, which is pretty cool.
For sure. And I'm also a big fan of finding your champions, right? So I'll give you an example. Last year, we did a live online trivia night for a year, and it was wildly popular. It was really well attended. And the people who showed up weekly, there's a good cohort of people that showed up weekly, and you got to find your fans, right? So they did the building and helped us bring in, they're super competitive playing trivia anyway with their brother, sister, their friend. So they would bring them into the game. And I think that's not to be overlooked when you find somebody who's really excited about it. Let them contribute. It's so great. We get unsolicited contributions all the time for the newsletter. We'll write about something, a band, a tour, an album release, a holiday, a new travel destination. And we regularly get people submitting photos and memorabilia and mementos that they just would like to share. And of course, we always ask permission, and nobody is yet to say no. So I think it's really valuable. I'm a big proponent of Net Promoter Score, and we survey the audience all the time to find out who our super engaged people are. And I think maybe at the outset, you start building that capability in to understand who's going to be there, really rallying on other people out of an authentic place because they're excited and they see themselves there. And they see themselves there with like-minded people.
I think the next thing to talk about when it comes to email would probably be email deliverability. That's an infrastructure challenge, but it's also a compliance issue that communities need to be aware of because you can write great content all day long and your messages still might never make it to the receiver if you haven't followed proper protocols or maybe there's something in there that's getting flagged. Has that changed? Is there something that you think senior living teams underestimate about sending emails at scale today versus in the past?
For sure. It has changed since we started in 2021, and it has changed rapidly in the last year, particularly the last 6 months. We all know what that's about, and that's about AI. So AI isn't asserting itself in the inbox or availing itself of the inbox unless you accept it that way. So Google launched the Gemini guided inbox, and now we see, I think the most recent data says about 20% are using it. So that's a huge challenge for e-newsletter publishers. And it's a challenge because what will win is it used to just be sender reputation and your deliverability was guaranteed because you had been moved to the primary inbox. So much of that is going away. The question becomes, how much of this audience will adopt those changes or move in that direction? And I'm not sure. But what it demands of the publisher and somebody advising teams building these products, these e-newsletters, is you must understand that ecosystem. So we're actively testing that right now. We have Gemini guided inboxes set up to see what's happening with our content. It's still early days, but I think you have to build and be prepared for it. So A/B testing of things like subject line, preview line, all of that has to be tested. And at this early stage, what's apparent is straightforward beats charming. Sadly, it used to be a clever subject line would get you an open. Now it's more about be direct and be explicit, and same with your preview, because over time, your little AI infrastructure is going to be looking at all of the information that you engaged with inside your particular inbox, which is going to look different from mine. And it's going to decide you read this 5 days out of 7 or 4 days out of 5. We're going to keep surfacing it for you. Oh, you didn't read it all week? You're not going to see it. Here's where it's a problem. What if I was on vacation last week and I just checked out entirely? It's a really big problem. So the other lever you can pull to make sure you don't get dropped out of sight is make sure you give people reasons to engage. So you have to give them content. Opens are merely a starting point now, and arguably not really a good measure at all, because with AI scanning, people can get a preview and never even click an open. Similarly, in some scenarios, it appears as if it was open because it was scanned. So disregarding the open rate, let's look at, are people engaging with content? Well, you got to give them a way to do that. So you need to drop content in there that is engagement friendly, whether it's just buttons to click because it's easy to click a button, or it's polls and surveys to take. Actually, let me talk about buttons for a minute. So when you run these kinds of engagement techniques, it's really a thing like a button is a big differentiator. So we run trivia every day, and there's 2 links in the game, and people click the button by a ratio of 3-to-1 versus the hyperlink. So something as simple as use a button wherever you can. It's really helpful. But I think at the outset, rethinking your language, the language you use, to make it clear to the AI what's inside that message. And it's going to be an art, right, over time to craft one that wins, because you have readers, they're enjoying it. I have newsletters and things I subscribe to that I may not open for days and days on end, but I open it when I see something I want to open. That doesn't mean I don't want to get it anymore. And that's the disconnect, right? So AI is going to force you down where you're not seen, even though it's a question of, well, you've removed my decision-making process. I wasn't opening it because I chose not to open, not because it wasn't interesting to me. It wasn't interesting to me that day. That doesn't mean I don't ever want to see it again. So it's a tricky time right now. You need to be testing what you're already doing against plain, simple, straightforward, informative language.
Sorry, I had to write a bunch of questions that came up while you were saying all that. First, I guess, how does AI impact deliverability, or is it just impacting? I just want to make sure it's clear for our audience, or is it just impacting opens because people are essentially reading previews and not actually reading the message itself?
Correct. Yes. To the best of my knowledge right now, it's not impacting deliverability, but it's prior to AI coming into the inbox, Yahoo and Google were really, really focusing on deliverability. So it kind of was the predecessor moment whereby if you had a list that wasn't clean, if you had dead emails, they kind of did that work already. So for a lot of publishers, they found in the last year and a half, they were seeing a lot of degradation of deliverability. And it was largely for that reason, because in our own list, I think it's about 66% of email addresses are Gmail. So it was a big impact for us. And so it forced us to be really, really hypervigilant with cleaning the list. And if you get ahead of it in that sense, then you are ahead of the deliverability issue. But if you haven't done that work, Google's already been doing it for you. So the answer is yes and no. It
Yeah,
already
that's true.
happened. And
Yeah.
going forward, they already know, they've already determined what kind of reputation you have as a sender and whether or not they're going to deliver and how many turns they're going to give you if you mess it up one day. If you hit the wrong button and you send to your whole list and you meant to send to a segment and all of a sudden there's 180,000 and yesterday it was 100,000. You don't get too many shots at making a mistake like that before you are addressed as an issue in the Gmail inbox anyway.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting you mentioned that. I was reading that about Google. It said like they have a spam rate threshold of like, it's like 0.3%. So if any larger percentage of your list is essentially deemed spam, like deliverability might be an issue for the list. Is that right?
Absolutely.
Wow,
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
crazy. So if the open rate is not as reliable as it used to be because of the AI previews, I mean, how have the metrics changed, or what metrics are you like hanging your hat on now?
Well, for sure it has to be engagement. And so what is that? Is it dwell time? Do you have a tool that helps you with that? They're available. You can understand what people are spending their time on. Certainly clicks and verified clicks. Another thing, another phase that the industry seems to have gone through and come out the other side of is understanding bot clicks. And depending on where you're publishing, some platforms have a better handle on it than others. I'm constantly amazed at the differential on any given day between clicks and verified clicks to the same set of readers over time, how the metrics have changed, where you see sometimes it's way off by a margin of maybe not double, but two-thirds, a third of reported clicks are not verified clicks. So the bots are all over these things. Sometimes it's the email providers. So sometimes it's, they're in there verifying content and doing their work behind the scenes, Gmail, Yahoo, etc.
Hmm.
And that's not cool, but it's the cost of being able to use these tools for free as an end user. They're trying to improve their platform. It's up to us to figure out how that works for our business. But then there's the nefarious actors, right, that are also in there. So you see, it's not uncommon for me to have a reader say, hey, I stopped getting the newsletter. And I go and look at the account and I see that it's a longtime reader, a very reliable opener, and somebody who engages by clicking on content, only to find, there's 37 opens in the first half hour inside their account. And then the same issue is open days and days and days on end. And then the whole system collapses because then they're flagged, not by me, but they no longer get it. So then there's no way to fix the problem because you can't resubscribe somebody who's being essentially marked, don't deliver to this address. So it's a problem, but it's it, it's what we have right now. So if we look at verified clicks, which is super helpful. So we publish on MailChimp and Beehive, and so we like to compare and see what the verified clicks are. I'm still not sure I fully trust it because we also have run campaigns where an advertiser will tell us, tracking their external pixel, which we can drop into the newsletter.
Hmm.
Um, and it's a different number. And so when you're being compensated on that number, that's the number they use. But when I look at my verified click reports in my publishing platform, it's a different number. So it's very hard to get consistency in the data. And and the way to address that is I'm always frank with partners about that. We're going to see a range here, and we have to agree that we're okay with that because it's different it can be different when you check multiple sources.
That's interesting that that would be a different number for different sources. I mean, have you seen? I'm assuming that the engagement data has improved over the years, especially if that's a primary metric now that people are using to determine the success of a newsletter. Do you find it's inherently pretty robust within the platforms that you use currently, or is it like a third party tool that you need to kind of plug in to be able to see that higher level of data?
Yeah, I think that's a great question too. And some of the teams we consult with have asked us about that. And I think if the data you're getting is serving your purpose. So, do you have an advertiser? Are they seeing a result? The click is just the start, right? So if they need to see a conversion, then the click is just the beginning. If you're a small publisher or if you're just starting out as a publisher, you certainly don't need the third-party tools. If you're seeing growth and you're happy with what you're spending to acquire growth. Now, as you scale, that could well change. And certainly I've seen mixed reviews on some of the third-party tools actually. And to be clear, when I talk about advertisers' data being different, it's because they're using third-party tools. So if you wanted to align with a partner that's paying to be a part of your newsletter, then probably advisable, if it makes sense financially to invest in those tools, probably makes sense to be on the same page as your advertising partner. But generally speaking, I think there's enough data. And if you're not scaling to a massive size, then I think you should be okay within the reporting that's within the platforms.
Okay, I think the next piece to talk about would probably be wait lists and long timelines because I think those kind of change the definition of what marketing looks like. I mean, there's a ton of markets, especially in senior living, where the demand outpaces the supply. Actually, I mean, we were talking earlier before we got on here too, just about the lack of housing, and some of the recent numbers that I saw back from 2025 was like in 2025 we only had 19,000 in Q1 of 2025. There was a total of like 19,500 active units being built in some phase of construction, whether it was started in 2025 or earlier, um, which is, okay, 19,500 units. I don't really have much context around what that means, but based on the number of seniors who are coming into the market right now, there's roughly about 400,000 seniors turning like 85 every year, right? And if that's the case, 20, let's say 20% of them will be looking for senior housing because that's typically what it looks like for that 85 plus cohort in terms of the number of people looking for housing. So that's roughly 100,000 people every year that are going to need to find a place to call home inside of a community. And we have 19,500 units in active construction right now. We have to basically be making anywhere between 100,000 to 125,000 units between now and like 2040 to even keep up with demand. So that's huge. So, I mean, obviously, in places like independent living where they have over, a lot of communities they're 100% full, they're at 95%, 90%. I mean, the independent living across the board, I think, is averaging around 90% occupancy right now. Wait lists have become just part of the game, and it is an opportunity to stay like top of mind. I think through email with your prospective residents, and everybody has a different answer for this. But what does ethical wait list nurturing look like when the timeline can stretch not just for like a few weeks or months; it can stretch for years?
Yeah, this is a tough nut to crack, right? I think authenticity's of utmost importance in that situation. And I think tough calls around how do we want to tell people, not yet, not yet, not yet. And I think some of those things rely on good old fashioned, let's really talk to people. So I think there's a big role that's overlooked here that can be played with check ins. And I talked before about cheerleaders and advocates, but really making better use of capabilities like let's host an event, let's talk to people face to face. Let's understand how we can support them and not lose them by understanding that whether or not they can move in, they're still going through this journey. And what happens, how they are when they get here may look wildly different from where they were 5 years ago. It's really about understanding what's the role you want to play when you have no good news, right? So understanding how do we participate in the community? Where else can we be showing up? What local events can we support? How can we show people that we are here and invested and want to be a part of this community without creating a sense of hopelessness or despair or giving up? Right? So to be ethical in that sense to me is to be committed to the goal of playing a role in the community. And so the answer has to be, or certainly one of the answers in my estimation is involving yourself in the community because the
Hmm.
person's still there, they're still participating, they're still going, visiting local events and meeting their neighbors and supporting local causes. And I think that's a huge, huge opportunity to help people write it out. And let's be honest, it's not easy and you will lose people and people will be lost. And so if you're committed to them forming part of your community, then you really got to commit and it's beyond just getting them signing a contract.
I love that. I love that. That's great advice. I mean, how would you design a newsletter that makes families feel supported while they wait versus like a standard newsletter?
I think it starts with what we talked about a little earlier, which is understanding who are those supports? Who are people relying on besides themselves? And who are the supporters relying on? And how do we close that loop? How do we connect all of those parties? So to me, it's value. When um I didn't talk about this, but when I started, I thought I was really had the best way to build my community would be to offer what's a strength in numbers play. So let's start our own rewards program, our own club, a card carrying club kind of membership thing. And you're only excluded if you weren't born in the 60s. So that's the only rule, right? And it's kind of it was a fun idea to pursue, but the reality was I had no exchange of value for folks because I couldn't bring anything to the table at that point. I didn't have relationships with anybody who could offer something of value to people. Even if it's free, it's like, why would you join? Why would you sign up for this club, even though you're going to get a cool card? And so in developing the newsletter, it led me to that opportunity, which was provide some value. So what's the value that people really need that's important in their inbox? What do they really need? What do they really need? Research is our best friend here to understand. And it's one thing to know how many people are dealing with supporting people on this journey, but it's another thing to really ask them and then follow up and ask them, is that what you needed, right? I think like so many marketing moves, sometimes we let ourselves and our clients and our people down by not doing the follow-up other than analyzing, did somebody do something with it? Let's find out if it was the wrong thing, what else can we give them? So maybe it's access to discounts that are not money-based, maybe it's access to valuable things that are supporting those people. But it starts with understanding that support network, and it's not just the families, but it's the medical professionals and the community associations, certainly volunteer groups doing a lot of that work, and faith-based communities for sure doing a lot of that work. A lot of them take it on their own, right? And there's great supported efforts done that way, but there's probably a bigger opportunity to help them play a role supporting the family on whole.
The last question, I guess, I feel like we're circling back, but I think it's an important point. When we were talking about deliverability, we ended up talking about AI. This is obviously a big challenge right now, and specifically about the it being a part of the inbox experience now. Given that it is a part of the inbox experience, um, obviously the goal is to keep this newsletter viable and something that people want to read and not just skim the outline of. What do you think senior living leaders need to protect at all costs, even as AI kind of reshapes the inbox experience?
Thank you for that question. I've talked a lot about the idea that in my own publication, we make it clear that it's written by humans and will be. And I've had a number of heated discussions with people putting out great newsletters that are relying on the AI tools. But I think one thing for senior living that is of utmost value is to ensure, particularly for this group, that it's a real person. And if you think about that, let's understand what is the context around. I won't even call it AI. I'll call it technology. So technology has given rise to a lot of serious threats, and a lot of them, senior people are the target of a lot of those threats. And so we're talking about cyber crimes and fraud and every kind of scam. And that's not to be a fearmonger, but it's to be realistic about the context here. So I'm not saying AI is going to come after me to scam me, although it's being used that way for sure. But I think it's really important to make it clear that when you move in with us, or when we service you as a provider in your aging in place world, we're going to be real people helping you with those big decisions. So it's really important to not dismiss the value in AI in making systems and processes much, much more efficient. We certainly use it for information gathering. We use it to help us build our trivia, certainly to gather the facts and figures for some of those games. I think when you're building a community of real people for real people, you need to be committed to producing content with real people. I think that needs to be protected at all costs. And there's a lot of ways to get efficiencies. I mean, my newsletter studio is a great way to get efficiency if I can make a plug for my own business, which is we're building it anyway. We're writing it by humans. We're doing the automated work for you. So there are lots of ways to avail yourself of human written content while still being efficient using the AI efficiency tools. But I think that's of utmost importance. Let these people know that these are real people. I think people get really nervous, and rightfully so. I'll tell you an interesting story. I responded to a comment on LinkedIn because a newsletter publisher was taking a bit of a shot at older people who hit reply to an email and say, unsubscribe me, please. And of course, there was deluge of, didn't they see the button? Don't they know? And I chimed in and I said, I guess you missed the data that said a lot of harm can come from hitting the unsubscribe button. Perhaps these people are just being really mindful of the risk and are asking you to just unsubscribe them. So not to be overlooked, right? There's a reason why people behave the way they do. And maybe sometimes it's out of fear. Sometimes it's out of, I want to protect what I have. And there's nothing wrong with that. I think that's a really important point. Stay human. That's the most important part, staying human.
Yeah, I think staying human while leveraging these tools that help with our workflow for sure. Um, and I know sometimes we kind of get caught up talking about AI like it's this negative thing, especially in the content space. But there's obviously systems of scale and ways to use it to help improve what it is that you're putting out in the world. I mean, this show is a perfect example. It wouldn't exist. I mean, it would exist, but it wouldn't exist in the form that it's in now if it wasn't for the help of AI helping me, create show outlines and come up with themes and ideas and ways to shift and modify the show based on what the audience is asking for. So it's been a big game changer for me. So along those lines, I mean, where can AI help with workflow without stripping out the trust? Because like you said, I mean, trust in this space, especially because it is a human to human type of interaction. How do we integrate technology like this without stripping out trust?
I think it's fair to start with what are the things that would cause harm or concern or, you know, negative reaction. So anything that's going to impact the person you're trying to build a relationship with, any AI that may impact that relationship and cause a reaction like the one I just shared. I'm going to hit unsubscribe because I'm worried. I'm not going to hit rather because I'm worried. It requires an analysis of what is the tech and why are we using it and what does that impact on my prospect. What we're really trying to do here with this inbox is keep an open channel of communication. So if we have a tool that in any way impacts the integrity of that relationship, maybe take a step back and look at it. And if it's not a negative impact or if it's an impact that's something you can mitigate or manage, then so be it. Off you go, try the tool. But in terms of processes, I think there's so much opportunity to understand things like customization, personalization, mining great swaths of data. Because as we said, we're talking about tens of millions of people having a similar need, but being of so many different at so many different life stages. So I think tools that help you do that are fabulous. Tools that help you create scripts that are going to help you address those particular needs and requirements are fantastic. Tools that are going to help you assemble leads, assemble targets, tools that are going to help you, sort through who are the most likely candidates, sorting. Those kinds of things are fantastic. In terms of creating content, stuff that helps you get set up, automation stuff, beautiful, amazing, so helpful. Anything that is going to have that potential for a negative impact, I think that's where you draw the line. And frankly, things that are operational and system, supporting tools really wouldn't have that impact, right? But then if you think about things like the benefit of AI in medical advances and in health and in nutrition, and there's so many ways that it will touch potential residents and service users, that those things, that's where they're certainly valuable, for sure valuable.
Yeah. No, those are all great points. If I was a owner, operator, senior living marketer wanting to start a community newsletter for the first time, how do I get started? What are like the key things that I need to be thinking about right out of the gate?
Well, first of all, you need to figure out how are you going to get people to sign up, or how are you going to assemble your audience, shall we say. So there's different mechanisms, and there's certainly different tools available, and you can certainly buy leads, and you can do aggregated lists where, it's a group sign up for a bunch of different publications or a bunch of different offerings. There's sweepstakes signups. There's a number of ways for you to create a list of names of people that you think might be the people who form your community. But then there's also doing the work of, let me go out to the fair or the state fair or the pie making contest. And I don't mean to be dismissing like the value of those things by any means, but going back to what we said about show up where those people are, start there and meet them face to face and shake a few hands and start asking them where do they go in the community and start targeting people there. Now, that gives you a couple of things. That gives you face to face opportunity to talk to people. You'll be able to gauge who's enthusiastic and you'll certainly get people to sign up. But then at the same time, you can use those people to understand where they're going, what they're doing, how they're engaging in the community. And if you wanted to start doing some paid advertising, you certainly could use those signals. But I think that's the best way to start. It comes back to real people face to face. Go to a seniors fitness class, host an event. I think it starts with those are going to be your best people, your best shot at growing enthusiasm. So I think face to face, if you're starting out, because really, what's the radius? So the group I'm working with, we're looking at it's 30 minutes. Most people are going to move in who live within 30 minutes. So if you draw that as your circle and you start showing up places and playing a role and supporting events, I think that's a fabulous way to start. And also by checking out who else is in the market. So who's publishing a hyper-local newsletter, hyper-local to the city, but even more to the community. Find those super local neighborhood places where people have stood up media products and publications. And people love their communities, people just love their community publications. And so it's a really great place to start.
I love that advice. I love looking outside of just the community, right? And looking in the outside community, the neighboring community of what they're doing and what's going on to make it add more value. That's great. I think the last thing I want to just talk about is I want to talk about Stake Media Group and just you had mentioned expanding into white label, private label, and then newsletter as a service models. Maybe talk to our audience a little bit about that and what that entails.
Yeah, sure. I'd love to. If you are a business, an organization, a brand, and you have a long sales cycle, give us a call or drop us an email. If you're somebody who understands that the value of the inbox is that relationship, that's somebody we would love to work with. If you're a professional service organization or a professional service business, an estate planner, a great divorce lawyer, somebody who's in a setting where they're going to have an opportunity to build a relationship over time, then let's have a conversation. Because what we're looking to do is, number one, provide our expertise around talking to a 55 plus community. And really our expertise is 55 to 65, 60 to 70. We understand that. We understand how to engage them. And we're happy to license the content to you. Package turnkey, ready to go. Send it to your list. We'll set up the list. We'll do it all for you if you prefer a more white glove service. That would be our white label. But then on the private label side, it's a really valuable opportunity to share that expertise with publishing, understanding the inbox, understanding deliverability, testing the AI implications inside the Gemini inbox. We can help you if you're starting from scratch and you're any kind of business owner or brand that would like to be involved long-term and over time with your customer, your client, your partners. We're certainly looking to do work with B2B as much as B2C. And I think there's a huge opportunity because most businesses have some kind of a list and it's just sitting there. And so unless you're committed to just being a promotional e-marketer, then there's perhaps greater value in that list. And by trying. And so our guidance would always be 20% about you, 80% about your reader and what's of interest to them. And we're happy to help people start from scratch. And even if you have no list, but also happy to send to a list you already have with your own content or white labeling and licensing our content.
Awesome. Well, that sounds amazing. I love that you guys are expanding into that space now. Um, Maureen, thank you so much. This was such a great interview. So much insight into the email space. I think unfortunately, some people think it's a space that's contracting instead of expanding. I tend to think the opposite. I've seen it be such a beneficial and critical piece of our infrastructure when it comes to the systems that we build for our clients, our communities that we work with. Where can our audience go to learn more about Stake Media Group or connect with you directly?
I'm available on LinkedIn, both Maureen Norman and Stake Media Group. And we are on the World Wide Web at stakemediagroup.com. And you can sign up for our daily newsletter at stakeyourday.com.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you so much. All right. Well, as we wrap up today's episode, I want to thank Maureen Norman for joining us, for challenging senior living leaders to rethink what the inbox is really for. This wasn't a conversation about email tactics. It was a conversation about trust, about consistency, and how communities can stay relevant during a long decision journey without sounding automated or self focused. So if you want to connect with Maureen or learn more about Stake Media Group, we've included her LinkedIn and the website in the show notes. As always, we hope you found this episode insightful and inspiring. And don't forget to subscribe to our podcast on your favorite platform. And stay tuned for more episodes where we continue to explore the evolving world of senior care, covering everything from innovative care models and leadership strategies to family support, technology, and the future of aging. And remember that From Leads to Leases isn't just an audio experience, we're also a video podcast. So if you want to see the video versions of our episodes, make sure to subscribe to our YouTube or Spotify channels. I'm Jerry Vinci, founder of CCR Growth. Thank you for joining us on From Leads to Leases. Please like, subscribe, and share this episode with anyone who might find it useful. I'm truly grateful for your time and attention. And until next time, lead with strategy and with heart. Chat with you again soon. Thanks, Maureen.
Thanks, Jerry. Have a great day.
Too.
Thanks for listening to From Leads to Leases. Are you ready to fill your rooms faster and increase occupancy? Visit ccrgrowth.com to learn about our Senior Growth Innovation Suite, a proven system to generate highly qualified, tour-ready leads, accelerate sales, and reduce acquisition costs. Let's connect and turn your challenges into opportunities. See you next time.